been wondering, what do you say and what do you leave out? And what I've decided now is to leave out your long profiles. I'll introduce you briefly and leave you to, introduce yourselves. So, are we about to start? This is just a call for us to get in order. I hope we are ready. Remember, like Demian said, since it is a TV show, it's very important that you have your video turned on at the point when you're speaking. When you're not speaking, you surely can have your video off. So if, am I loud and clear? Someone maybe should confirm about the quality of my sound.
Loud and clear here.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so here we go. Yes, greetings, viewers of the Youth Roundtable. Welcome to CIVIC Space TV. Once again, as we always do, every Wednesday, we use this space to highlight the issues that are shaping narratives, the issues and concerns of the young people in Uganda and beyond. And true to that, this afternoon, we have a very interesting panel. But before I even talk about the panel, maybe a highlight of what we are going to discuss today. Now, on the 9th of July, we all woke up to horrible scenes from South Africa, occasioned purportedly triggered by the arrest of the former president, Jacob Zuma. That followed a week of looting, of demonstrations, of arson, of civil disobedience, of internal activism, both online and offline. And different people have made comments across the board. But there are commentators, there are voices that have come through deliberately saying this is not about the arrest of Jacob Zuma. This is about the economic inequalities in South Africa, and that this has long been coming. Of course, it's not the first time we are seeing such scenes in South Africa. Remember, the World Bank has ranked South Africa as the most economically unequal country in the world. So it's not surprising that some people argue that these protests, this looting and whatever is happening has little to do with the arrest of Jacob Zuma, but much more to do with internal discontent and strife that has been built over the years. Now, to discuss this topic, today we have gone beyond the borders of Uganda and have a very diverse, both in terms of geographical location, but more importantly, in terms of work and professionalism. I have a very interesting panel. We are privileged to be joined by the following. One, Ayeul David. I hope that I'll be able to pronounce your names rightly. Mr. Ayeul David Abraham Macha. The name Macha rings a bell, especially here in Uganda. Who is in the management of Cool and Company Advocates in South Sudan. David is a young lawyer that is also Director of Legal Affairs in the African Youth for Development Commission. He's also the President of the Young Lawyers Forum in South Sudan. David, we are very privileged to have you.
Thank you. I'm very grateful being on the show, and I can't wait to interact with all of you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the north of the continent in South Sudan, I'll run direct to South Africa. We are privileged to have been joined by Khanya Bonani. Still, I hope I pronounced your name well. Khanya is a social scientist from the Rhodes University, and she's so many things. I was joking with the panelists earlier on that their CVs are too big for me to describe. But Khanya has provided analysis on radio, on TV, on the situation in South Africa, and we hope that her insights are going to be helpful in shaping this conversation. Khanya, good to have you on the show.
Good afternoon, Uganda. How is everybody doing? Hello to everybody that is watching. Hi, Abubaker. Hi to all of the panelists.
Hi.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are very excited to have you and can't wait to hear from you about South Africa. And from South Africa, I will then now head to Angola, Arcanjo Wacunzo. What a unique name. Wacunzo is an engineer and he describes himself as a social activist. And actually, true to what we are discussing today, he has actually been a co-organizer of protests against, among others, police brutality. So maybe he's the best person to actually tell us how these things happen. Arcanjo, good to have you on the show. We are very excited to hear from you.
Hello, guys. Morning, good afternoon. I don't know. I think we are in different time zones, right? It's a
Yes,
pleasure.
yes.
It's an honor to be participating into this talk, um, and to be reconnecting with my brothers from South Sudan and Uganda, David, and yeah. So let's discuss these issues, and it's going to be a great time, I'm sure.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Arcanjo. Yeah, and of course, like we like saying in Uganda, to balance the boat a little bit, we have our own lawyer and I can say social activist, Simon Ssenyonga, a man of many hats. Simon, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Yes, sure.
Thank you very much, Abubaker, and the rest of the panelists. Thank you so much. I'm really privileged to be a part of this discussion, and I'm hoping that we shall have very fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And without much ado, I'm going to start with you, Khanya. Since you're on ground in South Africa, a lot of things have been said about what's happening in South Africa, but if you could just help us put it in perspective, what's going on? Why the looting? Why the demonstrations? Why the internal activism, civil disobedience? This South Africa is supposed to be like a model for the rest of us. What went wrong?
Abubakar, one of the things I've said to you and to many of our colleagues in the Young African Activist Network from day one, when we all met back in 2016, 2017, is that South Africa is like every other African country. We have problems, systemic problems. They may not necessarily be related to our borders, but we have a lot of problems when it comes to how wealth has been redistributed in the country and how even in the post-democratic moment, 27, 28 years later, we haven't addressed that, whether it be the redistribution of land, whether it be access into the economy. I mean, I think Thabo Mbeki was probably one of the people who had first highlighted the fact there are two economies in the country. There's those who work in the formal sector, and then there's everybody else. And because government hasn't been able to regulate the informal sector, the keys to enter the formal sector they're very hard to access, especially if you don't come from a privileged background, whether it be based on race, whether you've gone to the right schools, have the correct social and mobility networks, whether you know people who already work in government to get into wherever you want to go. There's so many barriers to entry and hurdles. We have a high youth unemployment rate. I think youth unemployment right now is sitting at about 63% at the moment, which is something that government really hasn't addressed even prior to COVID-19. So it doesn't surprise me that we're here. So for me, I think, the use of the anger and the frustration that has come with job losses, that has come with COVID-19 and the restrictions, and how, people can't, make money for themselves anymore, and people haven't been given enough social security to support them, because I think even the grant that has literally just been reinstated, I think it was initially cut off at the end of March earlier this year, because obviously it was the old financial year was ending, and government didn't have a plan B for people who had been reliant on that 50 South African rand. I mean, that's hardly my math to US dollar conversions. I mean, one is 14.5 South African rand at the moment. You could still it doesn't cover ethnicities and races, and I think all of those frustrations.
Sorry, I have to keep interrupting you. I request that maybe you turn off your video. We may have to work with that, such that at least we can hear what you're saying.
Okay, better?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. So like I said earlier, all of those sort of impacts and factors sort of play into a lot of, people's frustrations in the country, and I think a lot of that boils over. But the result of that has created more job losses. I mean, at least 150,000 jobs have been lost in the looting, and I mean, this is a conservative number, and about close to 5 billion rand worth of business has either been burnt or ransacked in that period as well. And I mean, these stats are just for one city in KwaZulu-Natal, which is the provincial capital, Pietermaritzburg. So, as we sort of start counting the cost of the looting and the ransacking and the murders and the vigilantism that took place over the last 2 weeks. And I say 2 weeks because when it comes to protests and civil disobedience, it's not just the days where there's complete chaos and the police don't know what to do and the deployment of the army is required. It's also the buildup. And if you've been following South Africa's story, Jacob Zuma is kind of a central figure because there's a contentious issue around whether or not he has actually complied in terms of the legal requirements when it comes to the Zondo Commission and the challenges that he's taken to the Constitutional Court that have failed. He had subsequently decided to go to his homestead in Kandla and had a major gathering there, which obviously was against COVID regulations. And as much as people say that is the ticking time bomb, that is the point that became the catalyst, I think that South Africans have been frustrated, have been hungry, have been hopeless in a sense. And quite a lot of the political mobilization really used those emotions and those realities to and weaponize them.
Okay. Thank you very much, Khanya. I'll be coming back to you, but thank you for giving us that foundational perspective. And I will now go to South Sudan, to you, David. There is a writer in one of the dailies in Uganda who titled their article about South Africa in a very provocative, one day get what they want, a failed state. And, coming from the youngest country on the continent and a country that's not strange to instability, what do you make of what's happening in South Africa? You see that Khanya has told us that South Africa is as bad as the rest of us. Do you think, are these the same issues in South Sudan? Do you think the issues are different? Do you think it's about the arrest of the former president? Or is it a question of internal challenges, internal systemic challenges? David.
Thank you very much, Matanda. And I want to thank my sister, Khanya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her names very well. She actually said a lot of good things that can put someone's mind into the line of thinking of what is really happening in South Africa. Yes, I'd want to agree with her by saying, yes, South Africa is like any other African country. That is true. And what is being faced in South Africa is something that is actually affecting the most of African countries. I want to tell you, South Africa, unemployment in South Africa is the biggest factor that brings in inequality of people. If you see South Africa GDP in 2014 raises a little bit and it goes down per capita. And if you looked at the youth in South Africa, 50% of the youth are unemployed, okay? And if you look at the emerging markets, South Africa unemployment of the young people in the country is much higher than the emerging markets within South Africa. So this contributes a lot to young people being annoyed to that extent. To a little extent, there are politicians that connect things, okay? And then from there, it takes, they get it and capitalize on that. Fine, young people are annoyed because most of them have no jobs. If you look at South Africa, in the recent days, there was xenophobia, killing of foreigners, because they all believe the young people that, which we all condemn, wasn't good, but the young people in that country thought that these foreigners that comes in the country, they come and take over their jobs, okay? And maybe to some extent, they think that the government prioritize foreigners investing in the government in the country more than them. So there has been a rampant growth of unemployment among young people. And because of this, they feel they are ignored and isolated. Every person, every young person dreams a bigger dream, wants to be employed and have a living and raise the standard of living conditions higher. Because once you receive salaries and you are employed, you are able to do a lot of things. So South African problem is something that reflects on all of us as African countries. For example, in my country, we are the youngest nation, and you all know. We recently, on the 9th of July, we celebrated our 10th independent anniversary. And the same problem that is being faced in South Africa, it's the same thing here. Most of our youth are facing the problem of unemployment. And if the government does not create spaces, bring in investors and create industries so that young people could easily get employed, these young people will remain violent when it comes to them fighting for their right. Of course, we don't call for violence. That's not the best way to ask for your right. And if you looked at what really happened in South Africa, I would say they are tired of inequality. And then it is now connected to President Zuma's arrest or indictment to be the spark. That is the beginning. This is where now they dwell on and begin on it. Looking at other aspects that there could be politicians who have taken that space for them to capitalize on and put in their interest of bringing in the system that was in place to be disorganized, to be ramshackle. You see, so to me, I would say issues of inequality in South Africa are not only based in South Africa. And what is happening in South Africa might happen in another country. We young people, we young people keep on being following series of things that have happened. If you looked at Bobi Wine recently, him being a young person and being an opposition leader in Uganda, a lot of young people all over the world and within the country follow him, not because they really understand his political ambition or his political objectives or goals, but the fact remains that he is a young person. They all believe that, yes, he is doing this and he's a young person. This is the same thing. People can be influenced within South Sudan, within Uganda, within Angola, in South Africa, and any other countries of what young people are doing in South Africa. And if it is not condemned or if it is not contained, young people will all get influence across Africa and asking for their rights.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, David, for that elaborate submission. And you have mentioned Bobi Wine, which now sends me to Simon. Simon, you have heard from South Africa, you've heard from South Sudan, and the line of thought seems to agree with the shaping of today's topic, that what we see is more a function of inequality and, social and political issues within the countries. Just the previous speaker has spoken about Kyagulanyi, and you know that in Uganda, in the past 3 years, there have also been specks of violence, of brutality. And there are people who argue that, like David has said, that this is because of issues like unemployment. This is because of issues like frustration that has less to do with the leaders at the top. So just like we are saying that what's happening in South Africa has little to do with Jacob Zuma's arrest, is it true that what has been happening in Uganda has little to do with Kyagulanyi, or is he bad influence? We'll remove him and the violence will end.
Thank you very much, Abubakar, and I've listened in very keenly to the submissions of my colleagues. First of all, I think personalities put in the context of any social upheaval, any civic uprising, only bad sparks. Many of them are not the ultimate. They are only part of systematic challenge. I think that's what our sister from South Africa was saying, and our colleague from Sudan, that they are deeply seated systematic challenges that arise from from historical challenges, from contemporary challenges. But above all, I think I just want to draw the Kyagulanyi example and put it into proper perspective for the South African context. When you look at Uganda, for example, the systematic challenge has been hinged on historical facts that when the current regime was coming into power, there were very serious promises about the rise of democracy now, the respect of constitutionalism and the rule of law. And over time, the goalposts kept on shifting to appease, number one, the head of state, but above all, even to appease the international community so that we can keep a certain international brand. And that has come majorly because of the thought pattern right now as presented by the head of state towards pushing for the political confederation of the East African region. And perhaps he sees himself as a potential person, a potential leader. Now, the challenge with that is that he fails then to align himself to the contemporary issues that we raise as the young people. Most of the leaders that we have failed to come out of that history where they were before. So you have leaders who are addressing contemporary challenges of the young people as they would address them before. Because right now, what are we talking about? Before it was a Bush War revolution. Right now, you're having a technological revolution. Now that requires you to really be at the highest standard of efficient management of the state. Because right now, the nation or the world is just one globe. All right, with the move of globalization, we all see and draw examples in one particular instant, or even one particular perspective. In 1990 or 1993 or 1994, when South Africa was having its challenges, you remember very well that Uganda actually played a key role in helping the South African.
Sorry, Simon, I seem to have a technological challenge there. So as Simon possibly sorts his network, I'll come to you, Arcanjo. And I've come to you last deliberately because you have in Angola, you have been part of co-organizing demonstrations. And it's like these demonstrations have been justified. If we listen to the submissions of David, Khanya, and Simon, it looks like they are saying what is happening is justified because of the systemic challenges. Now, a question to you as someone who has participated in organizing these demonstrations and having at the back of your mind icons like Nelson Mandela, who have beckoned us to use non-violence to organize. Are there no alternative ways of seeking solutions to issues like unemployment and inequalities other than looting? In South Africa, over 300 people have died. Over 3,000 are in prison. Are there no alternative challenges? Is this the way to go? Is this the way we express this content and deal with our challenges? Or is this a mark of uncivilization?
Listen, Abubakar, as an activist, I'll tell you this. There is a physics law, the third law of Newton, that tells you the principle of you get in return your actions. The action that you make, you should expect a return in the same intensity or in the same direction from what you give. So this summarizes a little bit the idea of the protesting. As an activist, I'll tell you that whenever I go out in the street, is always to try to organize something peaceful, something well organized, because the last thing that you want is someone that comes out to protest and ends up injured or losing their lives, But as much as you create an atmosphere to be well organized, to avoid violence, you have no control of things that can happen throughout. Because often what I see in a lot of it never happened in the protests that I organized. that I co-organize. But often what I see in the others, even here in Angola, is that there is people that infiltrate, you know, people that are not related to the cause. They just want to go inside and get the opportunity and then try to create a different atmosphere than what is seen there. Usually these people are probably, they can be people from different parties against the government. They can even be people from the government, intelligent people, you know, from the intelligence services. Or there is always someone related to this big organization that they can earn something if something goes wrong. So this thing that happened in South Africa, it really needs a bit of deeper investigation to understand exactly what happened. Because I know the protest initially was for the prison imprisonment of the President Zuma, right? But then we see that there are other people that made that protest something to looting, go against the stores, breaking properties. So this is already different from the initial idea. Uh, but my concern in all this story about South Africa, not only South Africa, even some other places in Africa, is that we need to try to understand. We need, all of us as African, and I mean Black Africans, we need to try to re-understand our purpose, what we are doing, because sometimes we think we are doing right, but we are not able to judge ourselves, to judge ourselves if we are going really into the right direction. Uh, and often we skip to find the issues that we have and we blame others. I I cannot be blaming for my country is very good country. It's a very good country for foreigners, for expats. It's great. If you are coming here in Angola and you are working for another company, any company, and you're coming from a different country, you get the best houses, the best salaries, but the locals, they suffer. But I cannot blame them, the foreigners. I have to I have to point fingers to the government because the government are people like us, are us. They are supposed to create a better lifestyle for us, opportunities. So those are the people that create policies that can benefit or not us. So they are the ones that we have to go and ask for result, not those coming to because the foreigners, they are coming in other ways. They are also coming to help your economy, to add value, because it's sometimes it's knowledge that you don't have, you see. um Even if you go somewhere to work for another country and you're going to support them and you are given conditions, should be thankful, right? And those people that you are going there to help, they should also allow you to be welcome, to feel safe. So in this, I think South Africa has to go back to what was the beginning before the independence. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison so that the Black South Africans could have a decent life. They could have equal opportunities. He did already what he could for his time, for his time. So me personally, I haven't seen much much improvement for the next presidents from of South Africa after Nelson Mandela, because I think if Nelson Mandela had one job to do, all the next ones, they would have other job to do, and the main job is to improve the inequality, work towards giving a better life to their people. And what we've seen only selfishness, like people getting rich, building companies. They forget about the people. They forget how it used to be. You see, And inequality and unemployment rates, access to housing, access to land, as these numbers are increasing, we'll always see people unhappy, and with this, violence may come. It's
Yes.
out of control. You cannot control what happens out there on the streets. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Arcanjo. And now I'll come back to you, Khanya, and I want to thank you for your patience. I know that you have issues that are pressing, but thank you very much for sparing time to be with us. I don't know if you can try and turn on your video again, but if you listen to Arcanjo, in his conclusion, he seems to blame this on leadership. In fact, he has outrightly said it appears the Nelson Mandela has played a part, but it looks like after that, nothing has been done. Now, I can tell you that outside South Africa, like here in Uganda, there are people who are saying, no, this thing is a problem of governance. How could they, just arrest a former president in courts like that? This is lack of wisdom on the side of the governance structure in South Africa. So do you agree with this analysis? Is it a crisis of leadership, or are these bigger problems than the leadership?
So I hope you can hear me, first of all.
Yes, we can.
I think that there are two little pieces of context I need to give. One, so that people can understand the cycle of history when it comes to, South African history, protests and violence. And the second, and speaking to the answer to your question with regards to, is it leadership, right? Is that we understand violence against South Africa.
Sorry, I fear again we may have to do without your video, unfortunately.
I told you guys, South Africa has a very African problems.
I know it's evident.
So the first thing that I need to address is the fact that the cycle of violence in South Africa is probably very similar to the rest of the continent, in that when it comes to civil disobedience, the reason why things get heated and get violent is because we have a very long history of violence that we ourselves haven't dealt with. I know we all talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and what it did for families and amnesty, but I think that for us is where we really need to go back and really start unpacking why is it that we tend to choose violence over peaceful protest and vice versa, because I think now in the new sort of democratic era, even peaceful protests, when you think about fees must fall and the students asking for free higher education, those protests turned violent from a very peaceful march, from a very organized and coordinated approach to how to respond to not just the cost of fees, but also the access to higher education and formal employment and the linkages and the vestiges that come with that. That's the one aside, right? But to answer your question, yes, it's an issue of leadership in that you really need to remember that the ANC has not just been in power for 27 years. It has failed to really have a succession plan when it comes to understanding what the country needs at that point in time. In the Mandela era, and even in the early parts of the Mbeki era, both presidents actually said that attaining, political freedom is phase one of what South Africa means, the new South Africa means to us. There's still major fault lines surrounding the economy. Obviously, there's 9.2% of white people in the country. They own close to 80% of the economy at present, right? And that's a huge problem. How do we manage this, right? And a lot of people go on a tangent and put out arguments that, Mandela and Mbeki and everyone else in CODESA sold out. But that's another story for another day. I merely mention it because in understanding our leadership problem, we also need to remember the fact that there are deep roots to how we chose to address our transition into democracy. And a lot of people put, the sort of root of the problem in terms of economic redistribution at the feet of CODESA. So there's that. The second problem is that when it comes to leadership, one of the things you need to also remember about South Africa is that we've had a number of recalls in the past 5 or so years, whether it be Thabo Mbeki back in 08, 07, 08, whether it be Jacob Zuma now. In that 10-year period, there hasn't been a leader that has truly emerged and stamped their authority in terms of what do they want to do to ensure that we address unemployment once and for all. There's been a lot of parties, whether they be as new as the EFF, whether it be as old as the ANC itself, that have promised to address unemployment. But a lot of the implementation and the interventions that are put in really address the issue of placement, right? I give you a job, you look like you're working, but it's a contract job. So you're going to be out of work in a year? Because in contract work, I don't know how it works for the rest of the continent, but in South Africa, when you're offered a contract, it's for a fixed period. And the renewal is based on what the employer thinks you've achieved and if you are valuable to them, correct? I think the other problem becomes that South Africa really hasn't addressed the problem surrounding the retention rate in terms of making sure that not only does someone have a contract and a job to go to, there is a guarantee that you can return to that job after the fixed period has ended, right? And I think I'm going to go into David's point around xenophobia and our relationship with foreign nationals. A lot of, I think, the tensions that also feed into not just the looting, because a lot of foreign national business owners were affected during this 14-day period, is that one, South African labor, right, is protected by trade unions. Obviously, foreign nationals don't have the same level of protections, even though some of the oldest trade unions on the continent are in South Africa, and they keep sort of waffling on about how they are in solidarity with the rest of the continent. That's a lot of lip service, to put it very politely, and not to use profanities on television. I think the problem that we have in South Africa is that, one, because South African labor won't necessarily work at the same rate as foreign nationals, especially in your low to semi-skilled jobs, there is that tension where South Africans believe that foreign nationals are taking their jobs, where in actual fact, the real anger really needs to be pointed at employers, because government, again, has chosen not to use the inspectors that they put all across the country to make sure that employers are actually following the laws of the land when it comes to basic terms of employment, and to ensure that every single person that walks into a factory, a business, wherever, however they choose to make employment and to employ others, an equal setting and an opportunity for all. So I think there's that contextuality that needs to be added, not to sound exceptionalist, because as South Africans, we tend to do that a lot. But I think also for the rest of the continent to understand that the problem when it comes to South Africa's relations, with people, is really a scramble for resources rather than it is an individual hate. I think a lot of the reason why we're in our inequality, unemployment, and poverty trap is because government has literally left people to fend for themselves. As much as we have the biggest social welfare protection scheme on the continent, at the same time, we haven't seen valuable increases or a universal income grant come into centerfold so that it can actually address all the people who are not who don't necessarily have a child under the child grant, who doesn't have a disability, who is not a pensioner. And these are just 3 examples of the social grants that are in place and are serving millions of South Africans. Even the caregivers for the children that do get the grants, those are just people that are there to go and take the money on their behalf. And those monies are, a lot of the times, it's contagious, because even as a content producer, I'd asked a question on my show this morning, earlier today, asking whether or not, the reintroduction of social welfare after the looting, after the unrest, is going to create more dependency on the state. One of the things that we don't realize is that a lot of people are using this money to keep bread on the table, to make sure that, this is the only way in which we're going to survive, and let's use this money sparingly, if not innovatively, to ensure that even if we're working in the informal economy and we're selling sweets or selling airtime or, selling, daily essentials, we find a way to make sure that the money comes back, but also find a way to alleviate poverty for a lot of the times, you try and alleviate the problem for that month. But because of the delays of the social protection system, it could be even longer than that. We're not even sure whether the announcement that Cyril Ramaphosa made this past Sunday is going to be implemented as of Friday, because Friday is the end of the month, and usually social grants are paid out from Friday to at least midway through next week. So there are all of those implications and barriers that come with the leadership failure, not just in terms of the pandemic, but also systematically in terms of dealing with, the three major issues surrounding, South African communities. And I'm not just going to swath it as just Black people being excluded. The leading number of people who are unemployed outside of Black women in South Africa are colored women. So it gives you a little bit of context, from a racial point of view, that it doesn't just affect purely Black people. It also affects colored communities in its own way. It also affects young people, because the highest concentration, even in the colored community, is the 18 to 24 gap. So these are the sorts of failings that a 27-year-old one-party state government hasn't accounted for. And I think the failure problem doesn't just start with whether the leadership are pensioners or not, or whether the leaders are personalities. It's also understanding the fact that on the ground, there's so many institutions that can help respond to the crisis beyond just placing somebody in an internship for a year and expecting miracles. Because the formal economy was not built to keep Black people in that economy as participants, particularly Black and colored women.
Thank you, Khanya. I do not know if it's a network issue or you had actually made your point, but I now go to you, Simon Ssenyonga. Are you on? You seem to have some network issues.
Yes,
Simon, are you on?
Yes, I am on.
Yes. So I would like us to speak to the issue of the state response. So what happened in South Africa is that after when the riots escalated, the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, came out and announced that he had now ordered for the deployment of the South African National Defence Force to deal with the crisis. Maybe an indicator that the police services were not managing. And I had some elements within the Ugandan security apparatus just pumping and saying that you see, if we had not acted the way we acted, the police services the 19th of November last year, you remember when there were riots and the numbers of people who died, that if we had not moved swiftly, what is happening in South Africa could have happened here. And I saw many young people on social media, particularly Facebook, saying that, we give that to the president of Uganda. So what does that say about the militarism on the continent and the way we look at the challenge or the way states respond to civil strife? Thank you.
I think the question of the militarization of the security apparatus has a colonial context to it.
And the way
across, especially the British colonized states, you realize that the element of force through superior military forces has always been a tactic that was used. So it is inherited over time. When you look, for example, the unique situation, say in Uganda, you've quoted 18 and I think 19th of December during the protest, the electoral protests concerning the arrest of Chagula and Bobi Wine. You see that what the state always does to instill fear as a tool of oppressing dissenting voices, they will then use the military forces, but also because there is a fusion of the state and civic entities. For example, by law in Uganda, the police is meant to be a civilian-run force, meant to protect, preserve the lives and the property of the people. But because we have a head of state who is the commander-in-chief and has historically despised the police, so to say, and I said that with caution because I know for a fact that if you look at from the time you look at all our inspector generals of police, over time it began as civilian individuals, but subsequently it became military individuals. So across the African continent, you realize that there has been the use of the military to take over civilian forces. Why? Most of the time, it's because of you look at it also from the training angle of the military forces, that they are trained to obey orders straight from the commander. Unlike civilian forces, which are meant to quell protests or demonstrations or riots peacefully. Now, when you have the military, which is running the show, as opposed to the police, and you have power-hungry individuals who would want to cleanse their image at whatever cost in an instant, they would rather use a force which they can then easily control. Secondly, you look at it from the angle that the military, as such, is designed to protect, for example, the borders, the sovereignty of nations. But because we have moved away from the era of using, again, as I said earlier, Bush-like war tendencies, we are now in much more sophisticated ways of interaction. So there is minimal deployment of military forces. So I think it is also a redeployment tool for them to use. Now, I'm just shaping that context for the chest-thumping individuals in Uganda. But for the South African perspective, you have to realize that South Africa, even given its unique challenges, still remains a continental force in Africa. So a lot of lessons are being learned from there because, as I told you earlier before I left, that we have historical ties. So the chest thumping does not come because they're drawing some irrelevant comparative, example, but because we have historical ties to them. So what South Africa does sort of justifies. Now, whereas South Africa could be highly divided based on racial tendencies, and I mean I don't dispute that. I'm not so sure about the depth of the tribal differences in South Africa, but at least what is very predominant is the racial differences. In Uganda, you realize that, for example, we are highly divided on tribal tendencies, and all this, as I've said, has colonial tendencies. When you go for the United Kingdom, which colonized, or the British state which colonized most of the African continents, you realize that they don't have tribes. The Scots, the Wales, all these other countries within the United Kingdom are regarded as nations. When the colonialists came within Africa, it was convenient for them to divide the nations based on tribes. So along those lines, you realize that the easiest way you can quell whether it be tribal or racial tendencies is by using a force which may not necessarily bow into the appealing emotional forces that come with tribe, that come with race. Now, because of that, you have the military coming in to stamp a colonial aspect that was implanted in us along very divisive lines. So the question of militarization really is one that has colonial historical perspective and is meant to justify the essence of a state design that we inherited, unfairly inherited, but also which has been imposed on us, irrespective of our unique national tendencies. That is the situation in South Africa. That the best thing would have been appreciating and understanding the unique challenges that face the different individuals. But what happens is that we have learned from the worst and we are just applying it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. And I will now come back to you, David. And I don't know, maybe you'll answer this as the Director of Legal Affairs of the African Youth for Development Commission, because I want now to move to supranational organizations. After the riots broke out in South Africa, after about 3 days, there was a statement from the chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Musa Faki, condemning what was going on and, stating that it threatens the stability of the country and the region. On the same day, the 13th, there was a statement from the United Nations in South Africa. And 2 days later, the European Union delegation in South Africa also expressed concerns. And, speaking from South Sudan, which has maybe been a beneficiary, but also maybe a victim of global politics. And Simon earlier on hinted on the fact that we are now living in the global village. What is the role of these supranational organizations? Because there's integration on the continent, we have the African Union, we have the United Nations. Can someone have hope that some of these entities can help, one, to deal with the systemic challenges maybe, but also to come in where maybe the state seems to be struggling?
I cannot get you very well, my brother. My network seems to be cutting, so I'm not getting you very well.
Sorry, so you haven't got the question?
Yes, yeah, so I did not get you well, yes.
But can you hear me now?
Repeating? Yeah.
Yes, so I wanted to bring in the role of supranational organizations. So there has been condemnation of what has happened from the UN, from the African Union Commission, from the European Union delegation. And my question is, speaking from South Sudan, and as a member of the African Youth for Development Commission, is there a hope that these supranational organizations at the regional level, at the sub-regional level, regional, continental level, and at the global level, is there a hope? Can a young person somewhere in a country have hope that some of these entities can help in dealing with the systemic challenges, but in also arresting instability when it shows up and violence?
Okay, I want to begin by saying the legal perspective. These entities have helped in so many situations across Africa and across the world. My country is an example of the outcome of international community or the outcome of the international entities. If you understand that we just got our independence recently in 2011, we have been at war for so long, asking the government in Khartoum to give us our independence. And so the international communities have been condemning the killing of people by the Umar al-Bashir government by then. Their condemnation helped a lot in condemning things that are happening. It helped a lot to let the whole world know that they're happening within the Sudan. Why am I bringing this as an example? It is to show that, yes, there is hope. Once international communities or African Union issued statements like that, it is signaling to the people of South Africa that whatever you are doing is not in the best interest of the law and it does not serve justice. And the people of Africa or the United Nations are not in place with what they are doing. So how does it help? Condemnation alone does not help. Even if African Union says 1, 2, 3, what you are doing in South Africa is not right. Yes, absolutely. What is being done by the youth in South Africa, the looting, the killing of people, and all that is not the violence, is not the solution. And so condemning it alone without taking further step does not help. There is need to identify people behind the riots, people behind the violence, the killing of innocent people, the looting. There is need to bring all those people behind to justice. And there is need to be sanction. There need of sanctions. So even if the African Union or the United Nations condemns and start there, that cannot stop these people from committing more crimes, looting, and killing innocent people in the country. There must be people to be brought to justice. So if there are people behind the violence, then they must be brought to justice and
sorry, David.
given sanctions.
Okay. Yeah.
You get so that it sends a warning to those that are intending to be more violent, because there has been too much violence in South Africa. And like my sister said, there's been too much violence in South Africa. And what is centering all these violences in South Africa? It is none other than inequality in jobs. Okay. So there has been a lot that is happening in South Africa in the previous years and this very year. Speaking of this perspective of international organizations, I believe there is a need for African Union to sit and look at the intensive situation in South Africa. How do they save this? One of the recommendations is sanctioning, doing a clear investigation, helping the South African government to investigate people that are making the riots more violent. And of course, much has to be blamed on the government of South Africa, like what my brother said. It is not only the government of South Africa, it is the governments across Africa. It's only few African governments that clearly stands with the citizens of their country. Most of our leaders only come in and think of their pockets, think of their families, enriching themselves. And that completely brings back the aspect of violence in the country. And what do I want to say? African Union must also sit and look into the issues of leadership. Look into the issues of leadership. If we have people that are corrupt in their countries, what is the Corruption Commission doing in those very countries? And because this is where the genesis begins. If corruption is becoming more, nepotism is becoming much bigger than what is expected, the innocent people and the peasant people in the country will have to rise one day and say, no, enough is enough. Demonstrations, when they are being done and they are going in a peaceful manner, there are people within that will not want to move in a peaceful manner. They would want to capitalize on that and maybe become more violent so that they could get what they want, like what is happening in South Africa. People looting. Why do you have to loot? If you're asking the government to do what is right, why do you have to loot? Go to the government positions, tell them, yes, this is what we want. And what we want is 1, 2, 3 in a very peaceful way. They will understand. But of course, there's an aspect that the government themselves, our governments, forces young people to be more violent. Because, for example, if we are coming and we are peaceful demonstrators, we have come to a government headquarters to us and to read out our press statement. Why shooting? Why beating people? Why do you have to throw tear gas and all that to people? The moment police does that, young people will become more violent because they are being treated in a violent way. But if someone comes out, if a commissioner, for example, if we are demonstrating about corruption, and then we march to the Corruption Commission office, then we expect the commissioner of Anti-Corruption Commission comes out and talks to the young people, join them in the press statement and said, yes, what is happening is not tolerated by the law, and we will take measures to bring whoever that is involved onto book or to justice. Young people will understand, but our leaders don't want this. The moment they see young people on the road rioting, what comes to their mind is that they're going to be violent. By the time you start bringing police and the ammunitions of police before the young people, of course, they will definitely know by bringing these things, you are attacking them. And what they will do, they will act in defense and they will become more violent than expected. But if a president comes with his security and speak to young people about what is happening, believe me, it will all be good. I want to take an example of a country like Rwanda. If you have seen Rwanda, I don't think anybody has ever heard of Rwanda young people rioting. It's not because that they don't know their rights or they don't want whatever they are. There are even activists that criticize the government in Rwanda. But if you go there in Rwanda and see how things are being run, you will be proud as an African young person. And so I want to answer you by saying, Mr. Abubaker, international community, yes, we as young people, we have hopes that international community, African Union, which involve African Union, United Nations, and other countries, they could help in containing situation in South Africa, simply by sanctioning those people that are leading violence, the leaders that want to take violence as the best way to solve things. And then the leaders also in position. These young people must be heard. Why are they complaining? What is the problem? They must be also heard to let their issues be addressed. And by that, we will be now handling situations in such a way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. I will now go to Khanya because, like I mentioned earlier, she cannot stay any longer with us. But Khanya, if you can just speak to one more issue. Earlier on, Simon hinted that Uganda contributed a lot to the struggle against apartheid, and indeed the whole world, one could say, conspired or came together to fight apartheid. Is there something that the international community can do? Are these statements by the AU, by the UN, by the EU, are they useful? What can the international community do about what's happening, just as it supported the country against apartheid? Then you can make your concluding remarks and excuse yourself.
And like the official statements from not just the international community or the regional economic groupings and the African Union are important, but I think there's a much bigger conversation really to be had around how the world has actually responded to South Africa. I think this has been one of the major, moments of unrest that the world's seen in South Africa for a very long time. Obviously, for the continent, probably since Marikana massacre back in 2011, 2012, if I'm not mistaken. But for the world, they haven't seen South Africa like this since the early 90s, since before Chris Hani got assassinated. So I think for the world, it was a massive shock. And for a lot of institutions, they've been very supportive in that they condemn the violence. But I think what the world needs to do is allow South Africa to really follow the rule of law, which is, I think it's very interesting that some of my panelists mentioned or hinted at corruption and how ordinary citizens should approach, their leaders in terms of their demands and how they want to see change. And I think for a lot of South Africans, they have gone the conventional route where they've gone to, ward leaders, where they've gone to provincial leaders and even, national leaders to table these issues. And it's ironic that this unrest is happening at a time where the Zondo Commission is taking place. I mentioned the Zondo Commission in my opening statement because it's essentially an entire, we're getting close to like 4 years now of, it's a corruption trial. It's the biggest corruption trial I think we've ever had in our history, where we've actually had an open discussion on what happened to the country between, the time that Mbeki was recalled all the way to now. A lot of the state-owned institutions have been investigated. A lot of, political heads, the board members that were serving in that time period have been interviewed. And the reason why Zondo Commission is so important is actually it's a central sort of point whereby a Jacob Zuma walks in and is asked to sit in the commission that he was actually asked to put in place and install by law. Chilimando Nsela wrote a report which basically started the wheels in motion when it came to the Zondo Commission by releasing a state capture report. And in doing so, and in going to the courts and asking for the courts to implement this, Jacob Zuma, then being the president of the republic, had no choice but to implement the commission and to appoint, obviously, the now Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to head up this fact-finding mission on corruption in the country and how pervasive it is, not just in the government departments, but also in the state-owned entities. So this 4-year fact-finding mission is not just how we got to this moment, and how important the rule of law is in ensuring that we don't just address corruption, but also address how pervasive it has been and how it has affected not just the economy in everyday terms, but how it's impacted employment, how pervasive things like nepotism is, and how pervasive, patronage is. And again, these sorts of things that I'm bringing up are things that are prevalent throughout the continent. I think a lot of people are also fed up, from seeing how these findings and all of these testimonies are showing how much, South Africans don't know, not just about how the people they voted into power have managed the resources that belong to the country, but how little they've done in terms of making sure they've professionalized the space enough, not just to create job employment opportunities, but to create sustained wealth for the nation. So it's ironic that, all these condemnations and how the support of the rule of law has been, meted out by various institutions around the world in this time. But I think it's also reminding us the importance of.
Sorry, Khanya, I think we lost.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I
Yes,
got
we can hear
interrupted
now.
there by a notification. So basically, what I was trying to say just before I got interrupted was that it's important for us to remember the linkages between the fact-finding mission to patronage and corruption, but also the importance of how, what we unpack thereof. What are the implications on ordinary citizens who are struggling under the poverty line, who are struggling under just to put food on the table, to see all of this money being mismanaged, to see the lack of professionalism, to see their children, not being able to find work. But here are these kids from very privileged backgrounds with political connections who are mismanaging not just the state, but not providing opportunities for others to work. It grinds, I think, on ordinary, everyday South Africans. But I think that the international community needs to not desert us in terms of investment, right? So as much as we understand and we completely support them wanting the rule of law to prevail, at the same time, South Africa is not in a good place financially. I mean, we've been surpassed by, Kenya and Rwanda and Ethiopia and Nigeria and even Morocco in recent years in terms of not just GDP, but also in terms of innovation and what we stand to offer, not just to the continent in terms of economic trade relations, but also in sort of the global sort of span. We've rightfully and deservedly lost the title as the gateway to Africa. And as I don't think from a government perspective, there's too much frustration surrounding that. It also impacts how we manage to see ourselves, right, in terms of how do we now relate to all these new players, and how do we ensure that when we relate to these new players, we're not just respectful to those people who are in our country investing in us, but also ensuring that we're treating the people who are in that country who are there to transfer skills, to help us in the areas where we cannot, where we don't have the skill set. How do we learn and bridge and not, weaponize these people who are putting in the money and the time and the skills transfer, when we are discontent and we are excluded from the formal economy. So yeah, sorry for the very long-winded response, but I think one more thing I want to add. One of your panelists had spoken about securitization, and you guys were speaking about what happened in Uganda in November last year and how the state security thought that, with the way in which South Africa handled the military response, they were justified in their use of excessive force. It's quite interesting. South Africa, when it comes to the military, we haven't really had a mission, so to speak. So we send our military off to the United Nations mission, for various countries that are in conflict, right? We're not necessarily the military that's going to go to our borders and, we will defend our borders. But a lot of the engagement when it comes to the military is essentially civil operations. So in a looting situation, you would see the military come out. For example, before the unrest, we had the military deployed to the Western Cape because there was gang violence and there's a major drug and gun problem in the Western Cape itself. So those are the kinds of situations and scenarios where the military is used mostly in the country, not because we are peaceful, but because I don't think that our security cluster has really clocked the fact that South Africa actually needs to prepare itself for, major threats, not just internally when it comes to, the accusation that was being thrown around when it came to the word insurrection, but also how it navigates international and online threats. So, for example, the Pegasus report just came out this past week, and apparently Cyril Ramaphosa was intercepted. I think people forget that Pretoria is like the biggest delegation of the diplomatic community outside of the United Nations in New York. So for a whole president at Union Buildings down the street from like major, diplomatic institutions to be intercepted is a big problem. So when you don't have the military, sort of prepared for any situation, not just internally, but externally, problems like what we saw in the last 2 weeks with the deployment occur. And I think it's not the first time it's happened. It also speaks to the issue around how the police in itself and in its mandate is not able to enforce the law by themselves. If they need the law, they need the army every time something major happens. It shows that there's a weakness. And the third thing and the final thing that I say is that between the two institutions that are supposed to be implementing law and order, you need to remember that there is a right to violence that you have to navigate. So as a citizen, I give up my right to go and slap Abubakar when he steals all of my dates from my garden, right? And in return, Abubakar respects the fact that those are my dates. He can buy those dates. He can ask for them nicely, and because maybe it was Eid last week, I will decide, you know what? I'll be nice. Let me just send a basket of dates to be nice, right? But there is that sort of relationship connection, right? So for what I'm trying to get to is that if the police can't ensure that that relationship stays intact and that they look at the laws and say, look, Abubakar shouldn't have stolen those dates. So I sort of have to take you in. And because I have to take you in, I also need to put you before a court to say, are you guilty of ABC? When you can't do those basic things right and not be able to do it without using excessive force, it's a big problem. And I think another conversation that you guys need to have is whether or not our security forces on the continent understand that navigational tipping point, right? So as much as South Africa will be seen as passive in how the deployment went for the unrest that took place in the last 2 weeks, in the grander scheme of things, South Africa's army sort of was fit to purpose in the COVID-19 response. But even then, there were incidences of police brutality, which again is something else we'd have to unpack again, right? So, it's funny. South Africa has like this scenario. South Africa has this dichotomous scenario where it's seen as the model for things, but unfortunately, we sometimes collapse completely into our own set of problems and our own set of weaknesses, whether it be along racial lines, whether it be on economic lines, whether it be on even tribalistic lines as well, as much as we weren't separated per se because one tribe was seen as better than the other. The migrant labor system ensured that we were separate.
Okay, thank you very much, Khanya. And as we leave, I would like to express our sincere gratitude as the Youth Roundtable for the time you have given us. We know that you have worked in cross-cutting areas of media, international development, diplomatic circles, and so your knowledge and experience has been appreciated. And we wish you the best. We know that you're a prospective master's candidate in international policy at the University of London, Queen Mary. As you go there in September, we wish you the best and hope that the knowledge you get will continue to enrich our conversations and the development of Africa. Thank you, Khanya.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes, and so I'll now come to you, Arcanjo. Wacunzo. A lot has been said by our colleagues, but there's one particular element I wanted to bring to your attention. David did say earlier on when I put a question to him about the contribution of the development partners or the international community, if you like. And among others, he said that, the condemnation is good. It shows the direction. And he did say maybe they need to do more than that, but that in itself is important. As a social activist, is this a shared view? Because some people have said these international organizations are just paper tigers, issuing statements that they don't mean, and double dealing, sometimes working with the forces of the challenges that we are discussing. What are your views and experience? To you, Simon Ssenyonga. Simon, we are discussing the international community, and in Uganda, I know that there have been, and even in Kenya, there have been conversations around the loans extended to the government, and there have been calls for some of these loans to be frozen. And, some people feel that the international community has no teeth really, beyond just condemnation, and that, it's double-sided. Interestingly, in Uganda, the international community gets condemnation from government for being in cahoots with the opposition, but at the same time, the opposition as well feels as if they're in cahoots with the regime. What are your thoughts and experience?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. But first of all, you speak from a time when we are having an interesting scenario in Uganda. I think about a day ago, we are having a Russian company which has been declared bankrupt in Russia, having a major undertaking to actually to execute a contract to track individuals in motor vehicles in Uganda to facilitate a whole nation. So the question of international relations does not only lie towards the opposition only, but we have, and I use that as a very interesting example to actually show you how far we can fall in our engagement in international relations and even the choices that we make. That is just one incident. Secondly, in regards to the opposition entities, normally in terms of international relations, you normally see that even the political engagement at an international level is extremely politicized and divisive to only one side. I'll give you simple examples. In Uganda, for example, you start people who are pushing for democratic change, governance, constitutionalism, come from the left wing, for example, in the United States, the highly Democrats. Those who are calling out the regime and those who tend to associate with the regime more are highly right-wing people. The Republicans. But the strength or the weakness of the international community in the determination of national affairs, number one, lies in the strength of regional integration. Right now, you have a situation whereby we are in East Africa, for example, we are pushing for the final stage of the East African community integration, which is the political federation system. But you have instances where nations are not willing and able to have a full tie of their political, sociological, economic experiences so as to have one regional bloc. Now, the weakness of the regional integration system obviously gives a very strong rise to other forces which are outside the regional integration system to come and take over particular nations. For example, right now in South Africa, we could be discussing the strength of the SADC in regards to sustaining peace in South Africa. But you see, South Africa is the one which is calling the shots in SADC. Other nations seem to be highly, sitting back and relaxing. And I think maybe that comes from, you can take very clear examples. And what do you expect a nation, I think you've seen the conflict in the Eswatini, what is happening there, and why you may not be able even to offer a strong supportive role over an economy that may be stronger than yours. So the question of regional integration. Secondly, I think also the lack of civic competence for the individuals, for the nationals in different nations to be able to perceive national issues through geopolitical lenses. I'll give you an example. The ultimate uprising in any nation should lie not just on a mutiny from an army, but from the nationals being dissatisfied and being able to call out and say, enough is enough. But what happens to most of the nationals? They are simply resigned to looking back and saying, the government will think for us. Those with connections will think for us. So our civic competence has been built around only looking at things from a national level. Now, such conversations, when we have them, they help us broaden our understanding. To what Khanya said, that they help us broaden our understanding to pick unique skill sets that we can use to address some of the challenges that we actually have as different nations. So civic competence has to be built around geopolitical lenses for us to appreciate why the collapse of an international market can affect the Ugandan economy, why the terror in South Africa can actually affect the Ugandan market. My experience, as you said, I had an incident in 2018, I think 2017. I traveled to South Africa to represent Uganda in the topmost law moot court competition as a law student. My simple experience when I entered Oliver Tambo airport, I remember as I'm moving, I was one gentleman and about 3 ladies. The person at the airport, after we went through the clearance and everything, so we are approaching the exit of the airport. This gentleman stops me and tells me, look here, gentleman, you have to, you have to be checked. Your luggage has to be checked. I'm like, it has been checked, it has been reviewed. Why are you leaving the other ladies and you're hopping onto me? That was not enough. So I tell them that, okay, I moved to the sort of like a machine where I can do an exchange, like a forex bureau, where I could exchange the Ugandan shillings. I think I had dollars. I wanted to get rands. So as I'm exiting, the first question this lady asks me, are you South African? Or there is a term that she used. It was a derogatory or pejorative term to really mean I did not deserve to be in South Africa because of the whole the xenophobic attitude and perspective. What was my key lesson from that? That my limited understanding of the Ugandan issues to only stop in Uganda did not help me when I was now representing the national and international platform. So there has to be a deliberate move in terms of building international relations and competence among the civilians, if actually they are going to take specific interest and relevant discussion in terms of shaping how our nations have to turn out. So for me, it's those two aspects, because we can choose to blame the politicians, but you see, politics is not only to be, I like one quotation, I think it was a philosopher who said that he has come to make a discovery that politics is so serious to be left to politicians. You can't just leave it to them. The civilians have to be very interested in it. So we have to make a deliberate role. Finally, when you look at the nature of our hierarchical political order, you have the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, then what we tend to call the fourth estate. And for me, the fourth estate goes beyond the media, but even extends to civil society, because they are a strong force to reckon with. But look at it this way. How much has actually the civil society gone ahead to facilitate progressive discussion, not for the sake of appeasing their donors, but for the sake of actually addressing the key interests of the nation? Secondly, the media itself. You know that right now we're having a global pandemic, and the media itself has become timid. It cannot question dominant narratives, and these dominant narratives extend to democratic processes. Now, international relations should be able international relations of any nation should be built on a strong anchor of the boldness of all the various key stakeholders, not only the three arms of the government, not only for the fourth estate, which I know are able to include the media and the civil society, but also the civilians to appreciate what is their role in the global context.
Wow, thank you very much, Simon, for bringing it back to us. Whereas I asked you what the international community can do, you have actually shown that the bigger responsibility lies with us before we can even interact with the international community. So thank you very much. Mr. Wacunzo, maybe we can now, see.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Are you able to hear?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you. Not as loud as it was previously, but I can hear you.
Okay. As I was saying before, I believe the regional organization in the continent, they are reflect of what we are in each country internally. Because what we have as the leaders of let's say the African Union. As I was saying, I came across with the situation from South Africa through the video that BBC published. I don't know if you guys saw a kid being thrown from the building down, and then it was picked by a group of people. That's a very sad image that we are advertising what we are in our continent, and the most integrating part of it is when you ask yourself what is the reason for that, and when you really see deep the reason that is within this, which is the imprisonment of President Jacob Zuma, a citizen, former president, a citizen that is just like any other citizen in South Africa, which is suitable for punishment for what they did. I know Jacob Zuma was already charged with raping in 2005, I think. He was accused of money laundering. Uh, Now is going to prison for corruption. So it's just a citizen. It's just a normal person being injustice for what they did. So I don't understand um, why we go out, to do what they did for someone that did such things. It's not really. It doesn't make sense. If there was another reason, okay, we could understand. But it looks like they're just going out in the street because it's a black person. It's a black president. We cannot be fighting and dying for someone just for being black. We need to see what is this person doing for our community. Has this person done anything special for our community, for us? Or they just used the power they had for their personal growth. And even that, they breached the law. So if they breach the law, I'm sure the South African law is strong, and I wouldn't imagine something like that happening in Angola, like a former president being going to jail. Um, not that is doesn't even need to be a former president. Any leader like with substantial issue with corruption, involved in corruption, they know what can happen to them if they do the same. Um, so we youth, we need to stop and rethink what we are going to fight for, die for, what are we going to protest for, and what it's really not worth. That's what I have to share.
Okay, thank you very much, Wacunzo. We have indeed had a very deep conversation, and now we are coming to the end of our show, and I'm going to be asking you to have a round of parting shots. And in your parting shot, please share with us what you think the young person following this show can do for us to build a better continent, what we can do to avoid or deal with what we see in South Africa. And I'm going to start with you, Simon.
Sorry, I missed your question.
Yeah, my question, we are now making our parting shots, concluding the show.
Yes.
And in your parting shots, I had requested that we sort of share some of the recommendations for any young person following this show. What can they do to improve the situation on the continent, to deal with the systemic issues, to maybe demand for better without destroying what has been achieved?
First of all, to deal with the systematic challenge, I think we need to have a systematic approach towards it. Number one, as young people, we need to first of all have such platforms. Following this discussion, I would propose that we sort of have like a consortium where we're able to share experiences, knowledge, perspectives that can draw us to appreciate the unique aspects that come from every nation and utilize them maximally as a people. Secondly, we need to have a strong global force, at least a continental force, as the young people that is going to help us assess our progress, guide one another, appreciate everything that comes uniquely to us, and draw lessons and inspiration from one another. So for me, it has to be something which is extremely actionable beyond just mere recommendations. We need to start now. We need to get up, wake up, do something about our nations. I also think that as a people, we cannot simply keep on. Apathy is not a solution. It has never been a solution. We need to be extremely pragmatic in our engagements and be the force to reckon with as the young people. And the best way we can do that is not, by not losing our consciousness to any extremes, whether they be extremes in politics, extremes in economics, extremes in the social life, because in the face of new evidence, we must be able to adjust accordingly and be viable and relevant in any situation, even as we are right now. But above all, I am a believer, for one. I think there is no solution that is going to come outside or within our finite abilities. There has to be an appreciation that there's an infinite force that we should be able to relate with and get the best desires of what God has for the African continent. Otherwise, we keep on using the one man the one man fits all approach. You are a Ugandan, you want to act like a Spanish, you want to be an American. There has to be an appreciation of the unique challenges facing a nation, and we address them uniquely by drawing those different experiences. So it all goes back to us. It goes back to you, the young person who has been watching this particular show. It doesn't lie on any politician, any governmental system, any media, or anything. Thank you so much, Abubakar, and to all my friends, the panelists who have been a part of this discussion. It has been so enlightening, so enriching. I've learned a lot, and I'm hoping, Abubakar, from here we can have a platform of continuous engagement beyond just a talk show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon. I know I landed on you on short notice, but thank you for putting aside 2 solid hours to be part of this conversation. Wish you the best. David.
Yes. It's been a very good discussion. First of all, I'm grateful to have connected again with my friend Wacunzo and Masese. This plus Tosha, who has not made it. These gentlemen, we've been in Ghana together with them for Young African Leaders Summit. That was in 2019. I'm happy to connect with you again. I've been always I think I've gone to Kampala in this year for three consecutive times. I've been meeting with Masese. I'm glad that he brought me online to join you guys in the discussion. I've learned a lot, and I've met new friends like Abubakar, Simon, and Khanya, and other people. So I am very grateful.
Okay, yes, and network has arrested you, David, before you could land. But thank you very much. We are also honored to have had you on this show, and we hope this just marks the beginning of the very many interactions we shall have. David, are you still there? Okay, sorry. Okay, David seems to be having issues. So Arcanjo, maybe you can make your concluding remarks. If David wants to say anything more, he will have another chance.
Yeah. I think to conclude, I always try to share the African principle that will basically summarize everything that our future and our prosperity relies on, which is Ubuntu. Ubuntu ultimately summarizes everything, because I am because we are. That's basically the base of the Ubuntu principle. I am because we are. So, whatever I'm doing, whatever power I have, whatever I do to the other will also come to me. If we have this in our mind, no matter where we are, which country, which part of the continent we are, it will always end up being the key that we all need. Um, so with this, I want to thank as well for the invitation, Masesa, Abubakar, and all the other guys, David. And I also was happy to hear the South African colleague Khanya. She had the great input as well, and I hope to receive other invitation. I'll always be here available to participate and share in any topic that you guys need support or connection. And I also do the same in case I come across something happening here in Angola. I'll invite you guys as well to participate. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wacunzo. From Angola to South Sudan to South Africa, back to Uganda. You guys have been amazing. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Arcanjo. Thank you very much, Khanya, for joining this conversation. And thank you very much, Simon Ssenyonga. The conversation has been deep. It's our belief at the Youth Roundtable and Civic Space TV that there is a huge potential and there are great opportunities within the young people that we need to tap into as a continent and as a country. And we are very privileged to have had our inaugural, this is our first international show, and we are going to have a lot more of such, bringing together the young people across the continent doing great things. Thank you very much for joining. I ask you to subscribe to our channels on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, such that you don't miss any of this conversation that always just keep getting better and better. From me, it's just to say thank you.